Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Inshallah, we will start our dars as soon as our members are able to join uh, through the internet, through Facebook and YouTube. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. We will be starting our dars now. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Ameen. We are discussing the fifth verse of Surah Fatiha, the first chapter of the Holy Quran, under the in the light of the writing of the promised Messiah والسلام, as published under Tafsir Kabir or the Grand Commentary. So yesterday we started a discussion. The verse in discussion, the Arabic is Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in. That, O Allah, Thee alone do we worship and Thee alone do we ask for help or implore for help. So in yesterday's dars, we were discussing how Islam refutes the misconception about the doctrine of predestination. That some people are of the view that the human beings have no say or no control in terms of their actions and their thoughts. So I was able to present to you the summary of the issue under discussion. So today I will just present to you whatever Hazrat Muslim Maud has written as a background, and then we will continue the discussion. So what I have presented to you yesterday, I'm just reading the English translation of Tafsir Kabir in those words now, in the words of Hazrat Muslim Maud Raziyallahu Ta'ala anhu. Hazur says, people have two types of misconceptions regarding human actions. Some are of the view that all human actions are predetermined. That is to say, that man does them under compulsion, meaning a person does that without having under control, being under compulsion, under force. This view is found both among religious people and philosophers. Now, some psychologists too have begun to agree with this to a certain degree, led by Dr. Freud, who is an Austrian professor. Those who hold this opinion on account of an erroneous religious doctrine claim that Almighty Allah or God is the master. He is the Malik. Thus, like an engineer who, when constructing a building, decides which brick to lay in the bathroom and which brick to lay in the upper story. Similarly, Allah the Almighty is at liberty to choose who He desires to be virtuous and who He desires to be evil. Meaning whether a person is virtuous or evil has been predestined by Allah. Allah or God gives birth to people either as good or bad, and then they have no choice. If you're born bad, you don't have a choice. If you're born good, you don't have a choice. Huzur says, the Christians, having accepted the concept of original sin, have promoted the doctrine of predestination because if man cannot be liberated from the original sin without atonement, this means anyone who does not believe in the doctrine of atonement has no choice but to be sinful. Similarly, the doctrine of transmigration, reincarnation, also favors predestination. For the type of reincarnation that was the result of a previous sin would necessarily remain governed by the limitations that have been imposed on it on account of that sin. meaning your previous life predestines your future life. Hazur says the views of the philosophers were based only on observation that some people cannot escape sin despite trying to do so. Meaning, previously, philosophers have discussed predestination based on this belief that people are sinful, some people want to become good, but we notice from our experience that they are not able to let go of their sinful life. Even like, addictions like smoking or other sins also, it is difficult to let go of them. Hazur says, however, Dr. Freud has turned this, meeting the matter of predestination, into an intellectual debate. He believes that because man's period of learning, that is during his childhood, precedes the period of volition. Volition means when a person is able to decide, and freedom of action, which begins in adolescence, that therefore one cannot say that his decisions are made freely. We discussed this yesterday already, that Dr. Sigmund Freud, he believed that since the period of childhood is the period where all the impressions are made on our life, meaning we are taught about good and bad at that age according to what is around us, according to what our parents believe. So whatever thoughts, whatever view or point of view of looking at the world has been put in our heart, in our minds and heart at childhood, that's what decides our future action. So people who think that they do have volition or they have freedom of action actually don't have any freedom of action. It's just a mirage. It's just it just seems it only looks like they have freedom of action, but actually their actions are predetermined by their childhood, over which they have no control. Okay. Hazul further writes, rather what we call freedom of choice is in fact those inclinations that one develops in their childhood owing to their environment. Man believes that his actions are intentional and his thoughts are free, whereas all of these are the results of childhood influences. Because they have become part of his nature, he does not regard them as the result of external influences, but rather he believes them to be his own will. That when we make a decision, for example, I make a decision to believe in God, for example, I can tell myself all I want that I believe in God. But in reality, Dr. Freud is saying, I believe in God because that's what put into my mind when I was a child. If I believe that fornication is wrong, adultery is wrong, it's only because this was what it was put in my mind. Even though I think that I'm making a conscious and free decision that I will not fornicate, I will not do zina, etc., etc. But according to Dr. Freud, this decision is not free because I think fornication is bad only because it was put in my mind when I was a young child. So whatever decisions I make from that point onwards are because of the imprints of my childhood over which I had no control. Vis-a-vis, I have no control over my future actions also. Okay. Now this is what we discussed yesterday. Now the next points I'm presenting, they will be the new points. Hazur says these views of Dr. Freud are not novel. Even a basis of them can be found in Islam. The Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Ma min mauludin illa yuladu ala al-fitrah, fa abawahu yuhawwidanihi aw yunassiranihi." The Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that every child is born on the nature created by Allah, al-fitrah, meaning every child is born on fitratullah, meaning they're born on good nature. Their nature is good. Their nature is the imprint of Allah when they're born. But then their parents make them into Jews or Christian. If they're born into a Jewish family, they become Jews. If they're born into a Christian family, they become Christian. So Hazur says that this importance of childhood influences on which Dr. Sigmund Freud is basing his whole theory is not something which is novel. Even Islam has promoted this. Hazur further says that is the child, even before they reach adolescence, accepts the parents' wrong views under the influence of their upbringing and without giving any thought to it, begins to follow in the footsteps of their parents. Hazur sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that when you're born, You become whatever your parents make you. And when you become an adolescent, when you're able to make your own decisions, you are already so ingrained in whatever your parents have taught you that you don't even worry about, you don't even think much about it. He says, likewise, the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has commanded for azan, call to prayer, to be recited in the ear of the newborn child, to indicate the importance and the extent of childhood influences. That the reason Islam has commanded that as soon as a child is born, we should recite adhan in their right ears and iqama in their left ears is so it is to emphasize that even a 1 day old baby, even a few hour old baby, is already accepting the influences of their childhood, of their environment. So if the first voice they hear is the voice of adhan, is the voice of iqama, then they will have the love of Allah in their heart. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Islam agrees with Dr. Sigmund Freud to the extent that yes, childhood upbringing and has a lot of influence on how a person thinks and behaves as they grow up. But as Huzur will explain further, this does not disprove the concept of free will. Just because we take the imprints from a very young age does not completely get rid of free will. Hazur further writes, in Maliki Yawmiddin and Iyaka Nabudu, the Holy Quran has refuted the incorrect aspects of this view of predestination. Because if everything is predetermined, so Hazur is here talking about that if we believe in Allah to be Maliki Yawmiddin, and if we believe in Iyaka Nabudu, that proves according to Islam, this is not a logical proof, but this is a proof from the Holy Quran. The Holy Quran teaches that predestination is not correct. So, how does it teaching? How does it teach that? Hazur says, because if everything is predetermined, the concept of reward and punishment are void. Allah is Malik, He is the master of the day of judgment. How can we have a judgment if everything is predetermined? What is the need for a judgment if everything is predetermined? If Allah knows, if Allah has predetermined whether I will be a good person or a bad person, if all of my actions are not from my own free will, but rather they are because of Allah's predetermination, then what is the need for Qiyamah? Allah does not have to test us because we have no choice. The whole concept of reward and punishment after death stems from the belief in free will. If there was no free will, if we did not have choice in our actions, then Allah does not have to call us to account. God does not have to call us to account. So the fact that Islam believes that people will be judged after they die, whether they lived a good life or a bad life, is a proof that Islam believes. Again, Hazur is not presenting a logical belief here. Like I said, Hazur has given a speech on this topic, on the topic of predetermination, where Hazur has talked about this from philosophical point of view and Islamic point of view. Here, Hazur is only explaining that because of the verse of Maliki Yawmiddin, we can be sure that Islam teaches that we are free in our actions. That is why Allah on the day of judgment will call us to account. Hazur says, however, there is no doubt that man is free to the extent that upon finding guidance, he can determine a new way to adopt for himself. For instance, even if man is under bad influences, but he ponders over the attributes of Almighty Allah, he can hear the words Iyaka Nabudu from within him, and no one can deny this. That if a person, whether that person is a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew, does not matter, whether even he's an atheist or an agnostic, Hazur is saying that if a person thinks about the attributes of Allah, especially the attributes of Rabbul Alameen, the attribute of Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, and Maliki Yawmiddin, as we have discussed in the tafsir, that we notice that everything in this universe is moving from a lower stage to a higher stage. A baby is only a sperm and the egg of the mother, and then it moves and it evolves into a baby, and then finally it grows up into a boy. So we notice everything is changing. If everything is changing, that means everything is everything is qaim. It depends. It is dependent on something else. This is a logical proof that if everything changes, that and if everything dies, that is a proof that everything is dependent upon something else. And if you continue to take this proof, we call it the first cause, or one of the logical proofs is called first cause. Is if everything is dependent, everything is evolving, there must be something which is not dependent upon anything and which does not evolve, upon which everything else is subsistent, everything else depends upon. Similarly, we see that Allah is Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin. We have discussed this in our previous durus. If a person logically thinks about the attributes of Allah, his heart would automatically cry out, Iyaka na'budu. So a person, even if he's born a Jew, even if he's born a Christian, even if he's born an atheist, Hazur is saying if he looks around himself and he focuses on the attributes of God, of the creation of Allah, he will automatically cry out, Iyaka na'budu, O Allah, we worship you. Okay. Hazur says, further says, for instance, even if a man is under bad influences, but he, okay, I already said it. Hazur says, what reply can Dr. Freud and those who follow his philosophy give to the fact that circumstances of man continue to change and perspectives and the worldview does not remain static? This is a very important point. Hazrat Muslim Maud Raziyallahu Ta'ala Anhu is saying that if, according to Dr. Freud, our childhood influences decide what our future beliefs will be, then our future beliefs should remain static. If whatever we have observed at our childhood, whatever imprints are put in on our life when we are young, they are the ones who decide our beliefs, our thoughts, and our actions, then this means that after we become old, then our beliefs, our point of view should remain static. They should not change. But that is not true. People change their mind all the time. People are born Muslim and they sometimes leave Islam. They become atheist. Otherwise, we see many Christians, Jews, Hindus, atheists, agnostic, convert to Islam, Ahmadiyyat. Every year, Hazur announced thousands and thousands of people who converted to Ahmadiyyat. If it was only the childhood influences that decided everything, that no one should ever change their belief, no one should ever change their faith. So as we were saying, it is proven from our observance that people have the will, people have the ability to change their views. Hazrat Muslih Maud, Khalifatul Masih Sani, Hazur further states, had the childhood influences been so entrenched that man could not free himself from them, then the world from Adam alayhi salam to the present day should have followed the same unchanged path. Not only that people as individuals should not change their view, but if everything was decided from childhood, then the path of the world should be the same. Whatever teachings were ingrained to the children of Hazrat Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, the same teaching will continue. And the same belief they will teach to their children, and the same belief they will teach to their children. Meaning whatever belief the first human beings had, that belief should have continued. But we notice that people, they change their mind all the time. Even not only on individual level, but the change on a global level is a proof that this concept of predestination due to childhood influences is not true. Hazur says the Holy Quran has given incontrovertible arguments in support of this view, meaning in support of the view that human beings have free will. However, a detailed discussion cannot be made at this point. Only a brief discussion of this verse which we are discussing has been presented here. Okay, so here Hazur has given 2 points. One from Maliki Yawmiddin, that if everything was predetermined, there was no need for a day of judgment. If all of our actions were determined by God, then God should not or did not need to call us to account on the day of judgment. The second argument Hazur has given, that a person who thinks about independently without any bias, tries to research, tries to find out the truth, his heart would always cry out, Iyaka na'budu. That a person, and that is what we notice in the world, that people change their mind all the time. And Hazur is saying it is impossible for me to discuss this topic in detail here. Only a brief discussion of Iyaka na'budu, Maliki Yawmiddin, and Iyaka Nabudu has been presented here. Like I said, Huzur, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Sani has delivered a lecture. Uh, so when I say lecture, Huzur's lecture were not half an hour lecture. As second Khalifa's lecture was 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, sometimes even many days. His lectures used to go over many days. So his book is called Taqdeer-e Ilahi. I'm not 100% sure if it has been translated or not in English, but I will check and I can post it under the comments of this dars. Huzur further states there is another view also, which is diametrically opposed to the tenet of predestination. That there is an opposite view of predestination also found in the world. And it is that man enjoys absolute freedom of choice, and Almighty Allah does not intervene in human actions at all. Islam also rejects this view and says that you cannot altogether ignore those environmental influences which are affecting man. That they are, like I said, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, فَأَبَوَاهُ يُهَوِّدَانِهِ أَوْ يُنَصِّرَانِهِ, that their parents, they determine whether they are become Jews or Christians a lot of time. So Islam does believe that environmental influences do play a big role in affecting man's decision making and his action. Hazur says, hence, it is necessary that a superior being who is immune from all these influences should guard over man. And when such bad influences become extremely dangerous, then that entity, that God, should help man and should rescue him from them. That if Allah is all loving, Allah is all merciful, God is all loving, God is all merciful, and environmental influences are true. Environmental influences do affect our thinking, they do affect our actions. Then God's mercy demands that God should help us when we truly want to save ourselves from environmental influences, but we cannot do so. So if one's intentions are true, he wants to live a good life, but he's worried about outside biases. He cannot even think independently. His environment is telling him to do good. So at that time, God's mercy should intervene and help him. And so Hazur further states, hence, having taught the prayer Iyaka Nasta'een, God, Allah, has drawn our attention to and informed us that your God informed us that, O people, your God, He is not idle. It is not that God created us and now God does not care about us. Rather, He is aware of your difficulties. Allah is fully aware that our thinking is morphed, it is molded by what our environment dictates. So Huzur radiallahu ta'ala anhu states that because of these difficulties, Allah has taught us this prayer Himself, the Iyaka Nasta'een, that yes, I created you free. Allah created everyone on fitrah. Allah created not only Allah created everyone good, but rather Allah created everyone, not only created them free, but rather Allah created everyone as good upon the fitrah. But Allah Ta'ala does know, God does know, that in outside influences, our environment, they can lead us astray. So that is why God's love did not think of something silly or something nonsensical like atonement. Rather, God's mercy, God's love taught us the prayer of Iyaka Nasta'een. That, O people, when you feel overwhelmed, when you think that you cannot yourself decide freely or decide without bias, when sin is all around you and you have difficulty protecting yourself from sin, call out Iyaka Nasta'een. That, O Allah, only through your help, only through your mercy, we can save ourselves. We want to worship Iyaka Na'budu. That when we independently think, our heart cries out, Iyaka Na'budu. O Allah, there is only one God and Him alone do we worship. But our outside influences keep on making other things our God. Sometimes money becomes our God. Sometimes children become our God. Sometimes promiscuity, living a fun life, luxury, materialism, these things become our God. But we want to worship only you, O God, and you alone. So at that time, when you feel overwhelmed, you should cry out, Iyaka Nasta'een, Ihdinas Siratal Mustaqim. Okay. So inshallah, tomorrow we will discuss this beautiful prayer of Ihdina Siratal Mustaqim. O Allah, guide us on the right path. So this was the brief summary of the discussion under the verse Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in. Tomorrow we will start the sixth verse Ihdina Siratal Mustaqim and to the end of the ayah, inshallah. May Allah Ta'ala enable me and enable all of us to truly worship Allah. And whenever we are under difficulty, when we are faced with difficulties, may Allah enable us to seek help from Allah alone. And inshallah, when we truly ask Allah for help, Allah will be there to help us. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammad wa barik wa sallim innaka hamidun majid. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.